evening, I'm Jeremy Dawson. Our main headlines tonight. Destination unknown. At the end of Advance's first full week in office, we are
My name's Warren, and I'm a detective for the Federal Bureau of Entertainment. I was hired 1 month ago because an epidemic of uninformed indie game purchases has been sweeping the nation, and the Bureau needed the best of the best to stop it. I spent that first month deep undercover, observing a real wild card of a target, and I've decided to let a select few civilians come along while I report my findings on it to the chief. Take a seat, grab a drink, and settle in, because I can promise that this is a show you're not gonna wanna miss. As you all know, my task was to provide an answer as to whether this game is a safe purchase for the consumers or a trap set to empty their wallets for nothing more than a dud. The game in question today, and the main target of my first case, happens to be named Not for Broadcast. To start my investigation, I wanted to learn more about the origins of this title, as it's all too common for indie games to falter in this early stage specifically, prematurely ending their development journeys miles short of the promises made to consumers. It all started on January 30th of 2020, when Not Games, a small studio with less than 25 employees, released their newest title, Not for Broadcast, into early access. Early access is a label that's become infamous, not just around the Bureau, but with the consumers as well. It represents a promise that an idea will come to fruition in the form of a worthwhile game, so long as the consumers invest early on in development. Sadly, all too often we've found that these promises aren't worth their salt, and very often end in unfinished or non-existent games. Not for Broadcast was billed as a gripping, narrative-focused game that saw you take the role of Alex Winston, whose job it is to man the production room of a national news station during the takeover of a power-hungry dystopian government. You are put in charge of everything that's broadcast here, from what camera angle to pick, to what audio to censor, what ads to play, and even the overall narrative of the news as a whole. Not Game's goal was to have an expansive and branching narrative, with 4 different episodes culminating in a number of different endings. In a twist of fate, this ambitious goal was put on hold, however, as not long after development on the second episode started, the worldwide coronavirus pandemic began, putting everything into question. Luckily, this story didn't end in disaster though, as the developers managed to not only navigate the many roadblocks that the pandemic and lockdowns presented, but to add even more content to the game too. This came in the form of an in-game lockdown special, centering around the main characters living through their own lockdown, with a wacky twist. In the end, Not Games managed to overcome the early access stigma and pandemic setbacks, eventually releasing the full game in January 2022, with a complete narrative and another bonus level called the Telethon Special to boot. At this stage of my investigation, all signs seem to be pointing to a rousing success, but in reality, simply releasing a complete product is only half the battle. It was now time for me to see if Not Game's hard work actually resulted in a product that was worth the consumer's time. Starting off, I was made to pick from 5 difficulty settings, which appeared to allow me to choose how hard the broadcast and production minigames would be. These broadcast mechanics or minigames generally functioned as the core of the gameplay and affected nearly every aspect of the game, as Not for Broadcast is essentially a TV studio work simulator in a similar vein to titles like Papers, Please or Five Nights at Freddy's. You're slowly eased into your new job, and you're introduced to each of the many gizmos and gadgets you'll come to know with every news segment. The base tools you'll manage are the 4 buttons that select which camera to cut to, the censor tool, the interference machine, and the tape player for the ads. These tools alone can prove to be very difficult to manage successfully, as you'll need to keep them in check simultaneously with each other on many occasions. This means that large sections of the game will involve you monitoring many moving parts at once. The better or worse you do will impact the amount of viewers tuning in, as well as the ratings you get and the money you'll receive for your performance. As the game progresses, more mechanics are added, making your job even harder and more stressful than it already was. At first, I attempted to manually operate the entire production studio via clicking on each tool, but very quickly I realized that this was not fast enough to successfully complete every task. Luckily, Not4Games created an extremely efficient and intuitive system of key bindings that allowed you to do nearly everything all with one hand. Mastering these controls and the rhythm of each TV broadcast was the biggest challenge of the game, and led to some extremely successful as well as exciting moments. Making sure to keep the camera on who's talking, not holding on one shot for too long, and avoiding cutting to unintended camera angles added new dimensions to the camera switching minigame. Deciding what information to censor and whose truth is right added weight to the censoring minigame. Managing the wavelength machine and deciding whether or not to air anti-government TV broadcasts on it gave you yet another tough decision to make amidst the chaos too. Managing all these minigames at once absolutely got a bit stressful and overwhelming at times, but the game was just the right length at around 9 hours of playthrough to where it remained fun and not too repetitive throughout. Outside of this, Not for Broadcast gives you small reprieves in the form of more calm text-based story prompts that revolve around your character's personal life with their partner and 2 kids. During these sections, you'll face the consequences of your actions in the newsroom, be it government punishment, poverty, or general family drama due to what you decided to let air. While seemingly basic, these sections ended up being some of the most gripping in the whole game, as they let you see what life is like in this dystopian world for average people. How you shape the world will directly affect every aspect of your life, and these sections serve as perfect showcases of that. The conclusion I came to was that Not Games seamlessly interweaves gameplay and narrative into one, making what you do directly affect how the story progresses. Censor anti-government messages, and you'll bolster popular support of the regime. Don't, and you'll light the sparks of a rebellion. This is extremely reminiscent of titles like Papers, Please, but actually manages to build on that premise with the inclusion of 14 different endings and a fantastic live-action cast that steals the show. As you can see, Chief, the gameplay section of this title completely checks out. The varied and evolving minigame-based sections within the studio, while simple, were still tense and satisfying. And the text-based story sections outside of the studio, while also simple, were riveting and shockingly emotional at times. After thorough analysis, I found that the gameplay section here does enough to earn a B rating. After okaying the gameplay section, it was then that the next lead would catch my attention in the form of the live-action story elements. As you've probably noticed by now, the news broadcasts that you manage all happen to be made up of real footage of actual actors. Within these, there are 2 main figures that seem to lead this wild ride to whatever conclusion you choose. These 2 are Jeremy Donaldson and Megan Wolfe, who are the co-hosts of the national nightly news for much of the game. These 2 will be doing monologues, news reads, and interviews, all while you manage the back end. On top of this, you'll also meet everyone from key political figures to athletes and even clever imitations of well-known real-world people. Every one of these characters knock their roles out of the park and go a long way in helping create one of the most believable stories I've ever seen in a game. What you choose to do will drastically change these characters' lives, not in small ways like many other games, but in huge ways that will see completely different timelines play out. It's actually absurd how many choices you seem to have here. You could end up seeing a nearly different game to me by the end, as according to the Steam achievements, only 1% of players saw some of the story beats I did, and I only made it to 1 of the 14 total endings. Something like this would be impressive in a big budget AAA RPG, and the fact that this tiny studio managed it with a live action cast is just absurd. I can confidently say that many of you have never played anything even remotely like this, and the only way I can describe it is as an experience in the gaming medium that needs to be had. This is up there with Journey, The Outer Wilds, and many other cult classics that break the mold and show you what you never knew you needed. In addition, I also tried out the 2 extra episodes in the free telethon special and the live and spooky DLC. The telethon was a comedic training exercise where you're tasked with running an old charity telethon special from your production box. All hell breaks loose on this special, and you're sure to get a laugh out of it. The ending also provided a really cool twist that tied it into the main narrative and made it worth playing for sure. The Live and Spooky DLC, on the other hand, took a very different turn. You get thrown in to produce an episode of a popular ghost hunting show, where the game takes a turn towards horror. I thought this DLC was insanely cool and creative, as it sees your studio actually get haunted by a ghost who makes you pick what cast members live or die on the set. On top of that, you can pick what locations the hosts are going to, leading to yet more endings to explore here. Overall, Chief, after concluding my investigations on the narrative elements of Not For Broadcast, I have got to say I was blown away. This is one of the most immersive story experiences you can have, and I can say without a doubt that this section is safe for the consumers. Comparing it with all of our standards and guidelines shows that it surpasses all marks and receives an A+ rating. Finally, with all other bases covered, my investigation had one last road to go down. I need to take a look at the soundtrack that this beast of a game had to offer. I can say after my time spent with the game, that composer Jason Orbaum did not disappoint, as the track list here rivals the narrative section of the game in both quality and sheer scale. There are 129 songs in the base campaign alone, ranging from variations on the national nightly news theme, to old-timey songs, and even sort of live performances in-game in a number of genres. The sheer scale and variety in this soundtrack means that anyone will find songs that they enjoy. Some personal favorites of mine were the Fallout-esque Living in Paradise and the anti-government rap song Paint It Red. Honorable mentions to the many variations on the national nightly news theme, as those were also weirdly catchy. Well, Chief, it's a relief to say that the final piece of my investigation on the musical portion of Not For Broadcast has revealed brilliant results. As with the narrative, this section does everything it needs to and more to heighten every emotion felt during the runtime. Based on all Bureau guidelines, this soundtrack passes and will receive an A rating. And with that, my foremost investigation concludes. Going in, it was clear that this would be an interesting case, but whether that meant good or bad was only something I'd find out by experiencing it for myself. Not For Broadcast is a game that I can confidently recommend to consumers, sale or no, as it's a breath of fresh air to a medium that I thought had seen it all. When combining the grades of all aspects of this title, I calculated that Not For Broadcast has received an A rating.
Oh, what's that? Daddy! Daddy, it's something! Please don't do that. We can't show this on the news.
Kill it!